Does the Finger Lakes region need more housing, power, or both? While most people agree that communities across upstate New York could use more housing, few realize how important power is to unlocking more of it. To put a finer point on that, few people realize how many housing projects have been or will be in the coming months and years across the region put on hold or outright killed due to energy shortcomings. Ontario County has been tackling both of these issues head on. And to discuss the dynamics of the situation as well as what they're doing, I was joined by Ryan Davis, the county's economic developer, and Matt Horn from MRB Group. The first half of the conversation sets the stage with energy. The second half dives into housing and how it's all connected. Check it out. So let's start with what do you remember most from the Energy Summit now that it's been 4 months since it happened?
I think the most telling part for me anyway was, for one thing, it's an interesting day to pull that many of us together. And by us, I mean the counties that were in the room: Ontario, Seneca, Wayne, Yates, Schuyler County, Cayuga County. I mean, anything between Rochester and Syracuse, for us to all come together, municipal leaders, economic developers, county administrators, and talk about one singular issue and all have a similar takeaway, even though we got there from different directions. It was that aha moment that, oh yeah, that's affected me here in this town, or we've been slowed up for this development project in this area, or we really wanted to do this, but we couldn't do it because of this. That was telling, right? Because we don't always get a chance to do that. And that's unfortunate, but when we have one issue affecting all of us to this degree, for us to get together and talk about it and try to explain it through was a big deal. The other part that I thought was just jarring, and after 20 years of working on the inside, doing electrical work on the inside, not doing line work, to have that group, that one panel that tried to put a number to what a statewide cost would be to actually have change and be able to get this thing really to a spot where we need it, was just jaw-dropping. I mean, it was billions, trillions, not millions. And those two takeaways I thought were just huge for me anyway.
Yeah, I think the two things that jumped out at me was how wide the reach is of this problem, right? It doesn't just affect economic development. It doesn't just affect housing. It affects everything we do in our communities. And we're just talking about, things that are popular to think through now, like affordability. Every side of the power issue speaks to affordability. So just how much this issue touches was interesting to me. And then the second piece was there are so many components to this problem. And it's going to require such a diverse set of solutions and players that it's no wonder that we haven't gotten there yet, because people freeze. It's too complex. It's too broad. It's his problem, not my problem, or I can't get to my problem until he gets to his problem. And so to have folks sitting in that room saying, yes, it is a supply problem, and it's a grid problem, and it's a metering problem, and it's a customer problem. And I think on the panel that I had facilitated, one of the guys basically hit on the guy from the home builders, said, yeah, we're going to have to tackle all of it. And we're going to have to tackle it early in a really granular way, because there's not $1 billion sitting around to address this challenge.
What is Ontario County's situation with power present day?
The most frustrating part for me on this one, Josh, is I can't give you a clear answer any present day, right? That's the part that just drives anyone trying to do any development crazy. We know we don't have enough power right now on Route 332 to do one development. And if we can come up with a few $1 million, which the state was willing to grant through pro-housing infrastructure, we can build that development. But the one that's across the road, basically, they're going to have to find their own couple million, right? That's going to be their problem. We're not 100% sure there's enough in the city of Geneva, but they had 3 or 4 different housing projects come and go. Now it looks like one was really had the staying power. So that one looks like it's okay, but maybe the next one won't. We have another 125, 130 that are coming into the village of Phelps right off of Route 96. And we think we're going to be okay, but we're not really sure because we've just scratched the surface on the project intake. And, in another 3, 6, 9 months, maybe we'll figure out that it's not that big of a lift. But we could also find out that it's so cost prohibitive that we shouldn't have even gone through the process of getting that $3 million grant. So it's frustrating because you can't give a straight answer to a pretty, what you would think, basic question. When you're talking about water and sewer, it's, do you have pipe in the ground that can deliver the water to this 100-unit development? Check box, yes or no.
Right.
And when you talk about power, it's just become accepted that we'll get back to you later. And then when they get back to you later, you find out it was the worst possible news. And while you're trying to come up with the money to figure out how to not make it the worst possible news, the goalpost moves anyway. That didn't at all answer your question. There's spots where you can develop in Ontario County. There are spots that you can't, but I can't explain to a supervisor or to a town board where to put the pipe in the ground because the power's over there. So that's a good spot to aim, because I really don't know.
Yeah. And I think the kind of precarious situation we're always in is, to your point about the Geneva housing stuff. We come in, we ask a question. Do we have enough power to support this development? Yes, you do. That yes, you do is a point in time answer. And if you wait 6 weeks to go back and say, design your project to a reasonable degree of certainty, then you come back, you might get a different answer. And your point about like the worst possible answer, the worst possible answer for me is uncertainty.
Sure.
Right. And so what developers crave is certainty. And I was thinking about a project that we were working on together where we went to the utility provider and said, hey, what's it going to take to serve this development? And they said, well, it's going to need an upgrade, and that upgrade could cost anywhere between $6 and $14 million.
Yeah.
That's not an answer. That's definitely not certainty. And, the developer will just move on. If they're smart, they're going to just move on because it's too risky.
Yeah. And we had one of those pop up in Hopewell, right? And it's, not the hotbed for development in Ontario County, but they're going to put in 199 unit multifamily development. The developer came in and talked to me and my staff and said, we had been working with NYSEG and RG&E all along because Ontario County's been pretty vocal about this issue. And come to find out, what we thought we were going to be able to have, we really don't have. So it's going to cost, I think it was roughly the same number, right?
Oh, yeah.
Between 5 and 10 or
that's the
6 and 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
That the development doesn't pencil that way, but we're pretty far into it and we don't want to let this go because we really like the development. So now they're talking to the IDA about a tax abatement to make sure that thing can keep rolling. Now, I don't know if they would have come to talk to us anyway, but it definitely changes the argument, right? Their hurdle they have to get over is power, and their answer to it is IDA support.
Well, and think about that, right? So years ago, you would have leveraged IDA support to hit some community goal, right? The goal being affordability or density or quality or whatever you were trying to do. Yes, we would be happy to incentivize this if you were willing to do this, this, and this. Now it's to cover basic utilities. We have to give you an incentive. Same for pro-housing communities,
Sure.
right? I love that program. I'm so thankful that New York State stepped up and put, we can always use more, but these first couple of swings were not insignificant. Except that what it feels like is we might be just rewarding the utility providers disinvestment, right? The way we got here was the utility provider, and it's changed hands a couple of times. So this guy can always point at the last guy, can always point at the guy before that. But at any rate, we're standing here holding a piece of equipment that doesn't work and saying, I'm happy to fix it if the state pays me to fix it.
Yeah. And they get so in this case, the Hopewell case, when you're talking to the state or to the utilities, they're pretty quick to point the difference between taxpayer and ratepayer. we're using taxpayer money to offset a ratepayer cost to deliver infrastructure, and it's not water and sewer, because that would be good for the rest of the municipality. This is just to put power to one spot in Hopewell. It's a fascinating discussion that the IDA, and I don't know if other IDAs are faced with it, but ours is talking about, right? It's one of those, hey, are we prepared to do this? Now, to the developer's credit, in this instance, we talked to them and said, look, in order to come to the Ontario County IDA and talk about a housing development like this, we will usually require some level of affordability to be associated with the project. And it was very easy for them. So they will have a percentage of that project that will be workforce, 80 to 100% AMI housing in Hopewell, which makes a huge difference in Ontario County. It's right in the middle. It's perfect for us. But we have to get them there. We have to help get them there.
Yeah.
How does the average person listening to this is going to say, how does a county like Ontario, which has grown over the last decade and a half, find itself in this situation where power is hard to come by? This is not something that has suddenly just sprouted up over the last 2 years, right? Like, this is something that has been building relatively slowly, but building nonetheless. Ontario, I believe, is one of only 2 or 3 counties in the entire state that have grown in population.
Mm-hmm.
So how did Ontario County get there? And then the second part of it is, you rattled off a couple numbers there, $6 to $14 million. How does that get priced into a development to the end user, whether it be a mixed use or whether it be a housing project?
So the second part first, the real answer is it doesn't. If you go to a developer and say, it's going to cost you $14 million to do that, they never expected that. So it just means that it doesn't pencil.
Kills the problem.
And we'll move on.
Yeah.
So that's an easy one. We just won't have the houses.
But even if it's a smaller number, say it's $3 million. That $3 million, I think there's this assumption, especially when it comes to housing developments, that the developer can just write a check, and it's fine. The developer's got a bunch of money; they can just write a check and move on, right? Everything's fine. But that's obviously not the case. That cost gets passed through, and what does that actually end up looking like for the person who's either renting space if it's commercial, or perhaps trying to move into a home that's in that development?
Yeah, it passed on to the end user, just like any other thing, right? The developer knows the range that they're trying to fit for the price based on the product that they're going to provide. And once you hit that magic number where the product is no longer worth that price, they'll just kill the development. Everything else will pass on to the end user. It's just like any other anything.
Or it gets cheated down with incentives, right?
Sure.
So, we're used to this in, say, adaptive reuse situation, right? Downtown development, to create a unit that anyone in downtown Geneva would be willing to pay or could afford to pay in a building that hasn't been occupied in 50 years. It's not going to pencil out without, $100,000 per unit, or a couple of $100,000 per unit even, right? And we've accepted that over the years, right? Because it addresses a bunch of different check boxes that the community wanted to address. We want a vibrant downtown. We want historic buildings to be reused. We want them to be developed out in a certain way. It's the reason why these things are staggering is because for a long time we took for granted that there's a power line right there. I'm just going to run that line into that vacant building and it's going to work. And in large part it did, maybe in center cities, right? Central cities. But I have a theory about the conundrum that Ontario County is in relative to this. And, if you look, first of all, Ontario County is growing, but I'm going to say the opposite of what I'm going to say when we talk about the housing strategy, which is the county is a bunch of little municipalities. And you might know this off the top of your head. I don't, but of the bunch of little municipalities in the county, how many of those grew?
Yeah, so the growth is really Victor Farmington.
Right. So it was focused on the West End. On the East End, communities were, and to a degree now are, shrinking. And prior utility system owners looked at the East End and said, there's never going to be growth here. This place, it's been passed by. So I'm not going to take my dollars and put them into substations in Geneva because I'm never going to recover that money because they're not going to grow the way we need them to grow. And what that resulted in, by the way, 10, 15 years ago was decent sized industrial projects came, looked at the community, free land, a tax abatement for 30 years. I'm in. And then we'd say, great. And we'd call NYSEG and they'd say, no go, we can't do it. And on the West End, you have the opposite problem, which is it grew much faster than anybody could have anticipated. And so RG&E literally couldn't keep up with that.
Most of that sounds right. The not keeping up part because they couldn't anticipate it, I don't always buy that because Farmington and Victor have been pretty steady for quite a while now. But the rest of the county not growing, that makes an awful lot of sense, right? You put your money and your resources in the spot where it's going to pay off. I think Victor and Farmington were the spots that it was going to pay off. There's been other spots that they've put their money and resources in recently that have been announced that look an awful lot more like the east part of our county than they do the west part. We got spoiled with the idea that the power was always going to be there. The concern was always water and sewer. Was it Twain, right? It's not what you don't know, it's what you know that just ain't so.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
That's
where we're at in a lot of parts of Ontario County. But our county has embraced it. When you have a bunch of the surrounding municipalities that have watched the success in growth in Farmington and Victor, not that they envy it, but they get to talk to each other and understand how they did it. So when the pro-housing community program started, we had a lot of municipalities that said, yeah, I want in on that. Phelps is a great example of that. Geneva is another one. Canandaigua, both city and town. Naples, Bloomfield. I mean, these are not parts of the state where you think growth when you hear their name. Now they're saying, yeah, we are pro-growth. And then you find out that's only a phrase, right? It's not a real thing that you can do. East Bloomfield would love to have some amount of housing growth. I don't know where they're going to get the power from. And then you're talking, it's the 5-minute drive to Victor from parts of East Bloomfield. And that's not that far from where the growth spot was.
That's right.
So,
but to that end, and I understand the population growth or decline argument, but the demand side has been clear for a long time. I would assume that the utilities would probably say that, demand has really spiked in very recent years, but objectively, truthfully, the writing's been on the wall for, especially at the rate that the existing infrastructure has declined over the last 2 decades. The writing's been on the wall that demand growth was happening and was going to happen. I don't know when the first EV was introduced. It probably was 10 years ago or so. But we haven't made meaningful progress, it seems, there, not just in Ontario County, but across the entire region, despite the fact that all signs have pointed this direction forever.
Yeah, some of the investment that you see from the utilities across this region that they tout and say, hey, we're putting this amount of millions of dollars into this substation and in this area. To be honest, that substation was 80 years into not being touched. Not a nickel put into it. So $27 million. And I think Dansville's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. You put $80 million. That's okay.
You restored it to its original condition. You didn't buy yourself anything.
Yeah. And that serves 7,000 or 8,000 people in that area. That sounds an awful lot like maintenance to me, but again, I was just an inside guy. So, in Ontario County, they've had some investment in some of the substations. I think Farmington had on Hook Road, and they needed to try to keep up with it right after they started to build it. And there's plenty of places across, but the investment was never there. And the writing was on the wall. Like we saw it. The canary in the coal mine for us was Henrietta, right? That was the first time where we heard somebody say, you can't do that because there's not enough power. And that was really close to home. And at that same time as when we were doing the housing needs assessment. So we were telling the world that we needed this amount of housing to keep up with the demand, the current demand. And we've been pretty aggressive about it through our department, through the county. We've been going after housing and residential development to meet the demand of our employers, because this is the part that we haven't touched on yet is, places that have 40, 50, 60 open jobs for a long, long time, they need places for people to live there, or they're not going to drive 45 minutes to come to work for GW Lisk when you can work at a machine shop closer to home. So it seems as if Ontario County probably wasn't getting the level of love that was required to keep up with the level of demand based on what we found through the housing needs assessment and some of the stuff that we found since then with our market studies for places that wanted residential growth.
And can one of you just talk about the lag that exists between, imagine a world where the utilities say, hey guys, we're just going to actually make everything 100% flush immediately. The lag between those words and when the system is actually flush.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the system, I can't even scale it in my mind to give an answer, but we can give you specific site answers. When we were looking at some of this residential development and somebody said, yeah, we're going to need this, this piece of equipment upgraded, this substation upgraded, the material delivery time frame was 24 to 36 months. So you come in,
3 years,
fill out your building permit. We'll tell you when you fill out your building permit whether or not we can get power to it. If we can't, and it needs this scale of an upgrade, which wasn't monumental to my recollection, 4 to 36 months. To the point where, I'm sorry, Ryan, to the point where some of these developers had enough confidence in the market, enough confidence in RG&E's time frame that they were relying upon temporary, like, generator type power to run a commercial business.
Yeah. And one of the things that came out of the day, it was the same group that talked about the number, the amount of what it would cost. One of the things that I think it was one of the contractors working downstate or works across multiple utility providers, is that they don't use the same parts. They don't use the same language. It's a different playbook from different parts of our county, right? Because we have RG&E, we have NYSEG, we have grid. And, you might be thinking to yourself, well, at least RG&E and NYSEG, they must be the same. No, they're not.
Right.
So it's not even like you can buy in bulk or anything like that. You have to literally onesie and twosie it, which is what creates a 36-month time frame, which is just as big of a development killer as a $16 million price tag. And if you get whacked with both of them, well,
right.
It's not hard to understand why a place like Phelps that wants it, or East Bloomfield wants it, they can't get it.
And the market is there for it.
Sure,
right?
it is.
Like,
sure it is.
You could build houses at East Bloomfield and sell them tomorrow.
We've proven the market over and over and over again over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the Henrietta example a few minutes ago, and I don't think that's been fully resolved yet. It's in the process of being fully resolved now, but it hasn't reached final outcome, which just speaks to how many years you're talking about to engineer yourself out of these problems.
Yeah, because I think that was 4 years ago, right? I think that's when that first
22,
started. Yeah.
One last question on energy before we shift gears to housing, another really happy topic. What's one thing, having the experience now that you guys in Ontario County have had over the last several years, what's one thing that every municipality can or could start thinking about or doing today to put themselves in maybe a better position when a developer does come calling?
I think what we're trying to do in Ontario County anyway is to get a much clearer definition of where the power is and where the power isn't, right? And I think that the more that we can do that collectively, the better off we are. The governor's budget, or one of their initiatives now, is the Let Them Build initiative. I've encouraged all of our municipalities to go into the portal and fill out their list of complaints there, because that sprung from the energy infrastructure conversation. And I think some of that stuff will help out. Trying to figure out how to go into East Bloomfield or Naples and explain to them how they're going to really make a difference in this giant issue. I don't know if we have that answer, but I guess you try to tighten your timeline as a municipality up so you're not the issue, right? And then if everything else falls into place really well, then maybe you'll be successful. Those are the things that municipalities can do, but solving an energy infrastructure issue isn't in their wheelhouse. All the other stuff can be.
Yeah, I would say, the making the power piece happen is going to be a big lift for a municipality, but what they should be doing is advocating right?
Sure.
We did a program. Diana Smith on our team does these roundtables, these municipal roundtables where we bring local leaders together to just connect on issues. And the city of Canandaigua asked us to, and the city of Auburn jointly asked us to put one together for small cities. And we got these small cities around the table, and this power issue came up as something we ought to be advocating for. These mayors got on kind of a unified platform and said, what we're going to go to Albany and ask for is make something happen on this power infrastructure piece. And they went to Albany, and they talked to some people that were outside of their districts, some downstate people, and they were like, "Oh, we don't hear about power as much of an issue. That it sounds like," this was a couple of years ago, "it sounds like, maybe a very localized issue." And to his credit, John, I think it was John Goodwin from Canandaigua, was like, "I'm sorry, but you're wrong." John sits on the NICOM, the New York Conference of Mayors board, and he said, we hear it from every corner of the state, from every sector of the economy. And those mayors and managers really were able to school and advocate state leadership. And, whether it's the portal, the Let Them Build portal, or giving the local legislative leaders the information they need. I always remember G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, but it's only half the battle. So once they have this good information and once they've received this good advocacy, the state is really going to have to step up and make something happen.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up the advocacy piece, because stepping away from municipalities, one of the forms of government that we all deal with daily, some cases, is your school districts. And I had a conversation with all of our superintendents, because the electric busing thing is a huge deal for rural districts. And through that conversation, we stopped talking, or shifted the conversation away from, geez, we just can't afford the buses or whatever, to what really matters to rural districts in upstate New York is really just survival, right? It's butts and seats, which is what we talked about pre-COVID when I was on the board at Mid-Lakes. And when you're talking about making a choice between delivering electrical infrastructure to power an electric bus fleet, or 150 unit development that can get you more years of having that district, that's the conversation that I think the superintendents and the school boards are willing to have now. And they're armed with that. So when they went and do their advocacy piece through school boards and through superintendents, they can talk about surviving with kids, right? That's what it's all about for them. And it should be, that's what it's all about for them.
Yes or no? Should the utilities have to publicly disclose where the energy or the gaps in energy are in its service area?
The answer is 100% yes. And they'll say that they do, and they do-ish. If anybody can read the map, it's there, kind of. The problem is that it's such a layered issue, like Matt had hit on earlier. It's not just the power distribution, or it's not just the transmission, or it's not just the production, it's all of them. So you look at a map that the utility puts out on their website today, and it may look perfectly fine, because it's not hot out, it's pretty cold right now, but I mean there's not a lot of use right now. But does that mean that you can build? Probably, it might, maybe. They can't really answer that. It's three different issues, and the map shows one of them, right?
Right. And we had one developer in particular that I can think of was trying to use that map, and with the point in time nature of the data and everything, I think he had like narrowed down one parcel in Ontario County that was over, say, 20 acres that could, sustain any type of housing development. And then the next day you come back and it's like, oh, well, 5 more popped up overnight. Well, they didn't. The nature of the grid changed, the nature of the use changed. And so, yeah, they should publish it. It's important, but even the average public official is going to have a difficult time translating.
Yeah. And there's, I guess what they should do is make it more useful, right? And how much headroom do you have in a substation, right? What is your transformer capacity on whatever road in the municipality that we're talking about?
And disclaim the heck out of it. Say, this is as of today. Don't mark a change. Well, at least put it out there.
Does it not beg the question whether they know or not at any given time?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure that they always do. I mean,
back to the layers, right? The organization that manages the grid in New York State is a group called ISO, and ISO puts out their annual report, and the annual report was tracking kind of the effects of CLCPA and these sustainable power goals, and it was showing last year we created X, what's the Back to the Future, 1.21 gigawatts of power.
Yeah.
Last year we added this much to the grid, and we subtracted 2.21 off of the grid because we retired coal-fired plants or whatever we were doing. And ideologically, I don't have a position to argue one way or another, except to say, yep, if that power plant closes, next month or next week, then this mapping is a waste of time.
Yeah, and I think
comes offline.
Well, and the other part of it is this all existed anyway, right? The transmission issue and the distribution issue was a problem for Hopewell in that 199 unit development before CLCPA was even.
You got that right. Yeah.
And that's the part, I think, that's the part that they don't hide it, but that's the one that that nobody really discusses to any real degree. It's either the utility's fault or it's state energy policy's fault. Both of those statements can be true at the same time. As a matter of fact, they are. You can't take that much power off of the system and expect to grow as a state or as a county at all.
It's always a lot more fun to admire the other guy's problem than your own.
Sure.
Right? So the state created this regulatory issue. Now we don't have to talk about my disinvestment over the last century because it's all Kathy's fault. She's the one who put this package together.
That's right.
So let's shift gears, talk about housing. I've already been talking about housing, but Ryan, set the stage for us a little bit here. What's Ontario County doing with housing that's different than what a lot of other counties are doing in terms of how it's been approached, not just now, but over the last 3-4 years?
Yeah, I think that the needs assessment kind of allowed for us to embrace it, right? It's an interesting issue. We knew that we were short on houses, but we weren't really sure how to define that. And the housing needs assessment actually was getting started when I started with the county, almost the same day. So we were able to define the problem, which it helps, right? Being able to say, nope, it's 2,500 housing units or whatever the number is in the study over the next 5-10 years that we need to keep up with the current demand. And if that way you can tell if the demand shifts up or down, what that means. And while that was happening, I think everybody else was starting to talk about a housing issue in the region, so that we just happened to be maybe a day or two ahead of everybody. But the board really embraced it, not only for their own municipalities, but for the county to take hold of this and really try to do something with it. And that became the issue for my department and the planning department to really go out to every municipality and further explain the 150-page document that we were given, which was a great exercise. And for a long time, it allowed for us to explain to some of the neighbors that no, there really is a housing issue because they don't feel it or didn't know it. And, they're not all going to come to the Board of Supervisors meeting to have a presentation on housing. So we went to them and said, no, really, it does exist. But now what we're doing is really taking it through economic development lens, because it is an economic development issue. It's a workforce development issue. That's what our employers ask us about. So we're putting somebody in the department to help deal with it, help municipalities kind of define it for their own and define how they're going to address it on their own. And we're excited to start it. I think Rob will start the end of this month or towards the end of this month, and we'll start with some design guideline work with some of our municipalities and also start working on or he'll help me with the vacant rental program, pick up some low-hanging fruit and address and do some adaptive reuse work. And then we'll grow from there. But the county's really been supportive of the economic development taking hold of this issue, and I couldn't be happier for that. And I'm glad that they've trusted my department with dealing with it.
Let them build. When the two of you hear those 3 words and read through the proposals, what stands out? So
when the governor announced this initiative, they asked for me to give a support comment quote Of course I do, because I think that it's a great goal. We talked about it at the energy summit, right? Is there a way that both sides of the aisle can get behind the idea of dealing with some of the mechanical process issues that slow down development, both commercial and residential? So I fully support it. I think it's a great idea. I hope that they staff up, because they put out a portal to say, please share your comments, right? And when you put a comment box out, people are going to leave comments in it. And it's a wide ranging. We sit with Reimagine Rock Housing a couple months ago when they talked to developers and people in the residential development arena, and it was, what's in the way, and it was all these processes, all these timelines, all this, all that, and those are all going to be comments that the governor gets. Now it's read through them, organize it, and what are you going to do about it? So I'm interested to continue to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's my hope as well. I mean, we were talking earlier about seeker, right? I mean, there's a big focus on seeker. My bet is if you look back at the last 25 housing projects in this region, the seeker process was the smallest, lowest hurdle to clear. And it's something that the state controls. And so, of course, the first thing you ever want to do is take care of what's within your control, right? That's fine. I don't want to overemphasize it, though, right? I want to make sure that we don't let ourselves off the hook by saying we did this. I always want to be in the city manager club. I was a city manager, and I've tried to keep associated with city managers, and for that reason, I'm a big home rule guy, right? New York hilariously proclaims itself a home rule state, and the premise behind that is that the local government gets to set the stage, right? The local government gets to determine its course. And so what I do worry about with respect to Let Them Build or any other initiative that comes out of this is, taking away the local government's ability to kind of manage its own destiny or chart its own destiny. At the end of the day, if the local government doesn't want to allow a development to happen, it's going to find one of 1,000 ways to slow the thing down. When we talk about any kind of economic development, any kind of investment, we draw this kind of Venn diagram, this 3-circle chart. And we say for any project to move forward, including a housing project, for any project to move forward, 3 things have to be working together. The market, right? What people will come and buy. Will that work? The money, that's different than market. Do we have access to capital? And so is the money there to meet the market demand? And the politics. And we call that big P politics and small p politics. Mm-hmm. The big P politics, are the regulations going to allow for this to work? Are the regulatory processes going to allow for this to work? And are the neighbors going to allow for this to work? Because that can slow a project down as fast as anything. And so if you can't check those 3 boxes, then the thing can't move forward. And so what communities do who over-regulate is they regulate themselves out of the market. And where markets are weak, you have to calibrate your processes and your regulations to a certain place. So Let Them Build. Hey, anybody paying attention to this thing, I'm happy about and I'm excited about. I just want to make sure there's not a pendulum swinging all the way the other way to cheat out the local government's ability to determine what part of the market do I want to play in.
Yeah, and the good news for us in Ontario County, anyway, anybody in the region, we have a dashboard through the pro-housing community. So those municipalities have already raised their hands. We know who's pro-housing. So would at least be interested in hearing more about it, and how can we be more nimble, more developer friendly. We had a conversation in the county ad hoc committee, housing ad hoc committee last week to talk about your piece about express zoning in Ithaca. And honestly, sitting there as the person who is going to be responsible for the housing person in Ontario County, I think our conversation about express zoning took longer than what I think it should have taken. So, it's easy to climb down those rabbit holes, but at least we're talking about moving the needle in the right direction in Ontario County. I don't know if that would have happened without the housing needs assessment. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have happened without the ad hoc committee. So I think we can keep that going, even to further maybe the Let Them Build initiative in Ontario County, regardless of what happens out of the The governor's initiative will have design guidelines and more express zoning so we can match the 3-year timeline that the utilities have.
Right. Well, go ahead, John.
What is the, if not that, what is the number one bottleneck in the process? Most common.
For us in Ontario County, the thing that's most in the way of any residential development is energy infrastructure. If we fix that, then I think it's for the municipalities to really put pen to paper on some of their design guidelines, right? We're new to being pro housing, but the willingness to work on it is there, that I think we can overcome that pretty quickly. It's just going to take a little bit of handholding and a little bit of education. We'll sit down with our code people and with our planning and zoning people for every municipality and in the county and say, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then let's draw the map to get you there. But I think we can do that pretty quick.
And what I like about Ontario County's approach and about certain elements of the pro housing communities approach is it allows those communities who want to be ready to avail themselves of the resources to get ready.
Sure.
Right. We did a housing study. I'll leave the names off, but we did a housing study in the region a couple of years ago, and there was one particular urban area in the county, or what the urban for that part of the region, and one particular urban area of the county, and it flared out at its edges. It was very rural, and the more urban center, the county seat, in fact, their mayor and council came forward and said, "We're not interested. We don't want housing here. But we definitely don't want affordable housing. We think we're too affordable as it is, and we don't want to grow. We want to stay where we are." And the folks out in the on the outer rings of that urban area said, no, we're ready. Like we made some infrastructure investments and we just don't know what to do next. So it was very easy to tailor a countywide housing strategy to say, leave this community alone. Like you're going to be swimming upstream, even though it makes the most sense that this is where the density of housing might take place. Find the right housing typology for this outer ring and then teach these folks how to do it or prepare them to do it. There are communities out there today who still don't have zoning. There are communities less than a mile from where we're sitting today that do not have zoning and that have volunteer boards. All of us have volunteer boards that really govern this. And those boards, some are better trained than less trained. And so again, like what's within your control, tune up your development regulations, tune up your development processes, get your planning and zoning boards trained and understanding. But I'll take one step up into the ether and say, decide, do we want housing in this community, and what type of housing do we want in this community? And then go from there.